And good morning, and welcome to the Immigrants podcast. Tip. Today we have the beautiful mind of Dr. Macomb, is a vibrant graduate of Cookman University between the years that just up the late 2000s. A philosopher king walked among us. Dr. Paul Macomb wasn't just a visiting professor of sociology and philosophy, he was also a maestro, orchestrating a symphony of thoughts that danced between the notes of modern philosophy and the rhythm of sociology's pulse. When he wasn't igniting your minds in the classroom, he ruled the empire of Macombian Foundation, wearing the dual crowns of president and CEO since 2008. He wasn't just an academic, he was a visionary, turning the gears, changing the communities, one enlightening project at a time. Dr. Macomb isn't just shying away from the spotlight, he graced and has graced stages from Nottingham in Miami, bringing with him a tempest of ideas that challenged how we see the intricate web of race, class within the tapestry of Black communities. His words were more than speeches, they were revolutionary in sentences, leaving audiences in London, Birmingham, and beyond in a spellbound. His keynote address on oppositional cultural theory provokes people to think beyond the normal human capacity and to embody the body of humanity. Dr. Macomb, welcome to TAPE. How are you?
Fine things. Just one quick correction. I graduated from Florida Atlantic University, and I taught at Bethune-Cookman University.
Thank you for clarity. Thank you.
No problem, no
Appreciate it.
problem, brother.
Very good. We're so glad to have you here today. Um, our show is about talking about success. To me, I'm just curious from your perspective, what is success and how do you define success?
Start off. um, that's a complicated question for me because it will go against the grain uh, compared to how others define success. I define success in terms of my own ontological perspective and epistemological perspective. So, whereas in American society, success is usually defined by your ability to ascertain material wealth uh, and achieve all your aspirations, the quote unquote American dream. For me, it's a little vague because there's a problem with that definition of success, and the problem is grounded in capitalism itself. Because if everybody tried to define, contrary to the American mantra, if everyone tried to define their success vis-a-vis the mantra of the American dream, we would exhaust the resource framework that is the earth, and which we're doing contemporarily. We're destroying the earth, all in the name of capitalism, material success, and wealth. So for me, success as I define it vis-a-vis my ontology is achieving a sort of balance between your life, the material world, and that includes, for me, the material world not only includes the material world that we see, but also the material world that we don't see, and trying to find peace, what we call homeostasis between my being as a human being and the material world and other beings that occupy this material world. So it's not in terms of material wealth, it's more so in terms of social, emotional, and spiritual balance and harmony. So that's how I define success.
You touched on capitalism, and I would like for us to kind of delve into your definition of how capitalism, or your understanding of how capitalism affects the process of how the world works and how things work, and how compared to other economic theories, capitalism either fails or stands out to them in comparison.
I was actually trained as a phenomenologist and a structural Marxist. So I do believe in the Marxist notion that capitalism leads to not only alienation but also to exploitation of
Mhm.
labor. And the initial form of capitalism, and we're all people of color here. The initial form of capitalism that we as people of color was introduced into was mercantilist capitalism, in which we as people of color occupied what they call slaves, and therefore we offered free labor. And the purpose of mercantilism was that economic sustainability was based on what you call the metropole extracting raw materials from the periphery nations or colonies. And these raw materials were then manufactured so that into manufactured products to sell to those who live in the metropole. So that increased the wealth of metropolitan cities like London, Paris, and other European cities who are the initial creators of this mercantilist system. Now, people who were brought into the colonies to extract raw materials were basically enslaved, and therefore the material conditions that were not conducive to those living in the metropole. So that's the initial phase of capitalism that we were thrown into. Then in 1776, uh, Adam Smith wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, in which he argues this mercantilist colony relationship is problematic, and it will lead to, believe it or not, Adam Smith before Marx is saying that this will lead to alienation, it will lead to exploitation. People always assume that Adam Smith was pro-exploitation. He wasn't, if you read The Wealth of Nations. So what he argues is that, no, all nations, instead of having colonies, what we should have are nation states in which wealth is generated by a bourgeoisie, and this bourgeoisie could in turn provide material wealth for all of the society, but the main focus is on specialization. So a state specialization as well as free trade. So a state can emphasize producing wine and trade with a nation state that emphasizes trading, let's say, sugar. So
Dr. Macomb, I can't help myself, but I have to jump in.
go ahead.
As you're getting really technical, which I'm loving, could
Okay,
you
I'm sorry.
separate the two things, socialism and Marxism, for me?
Okay. So, and I was going to get to that, but so what you find is that, so now you have liberalism that would emerge vis-a-vis mercantilism. Now, Marx would come and write and critique Adam Smith's liberalism, because what he argues is that if you specialize in making sugar, or I specialize in making wine, the problem that becomes, the only way that the person, the capitalist, who is investing in this wine production or this sugar production, the only way that person can make money is one of two ways. Either by making the working day longer, so therefore you work longer to produce more, in which the capitalist then can sell and then use that to pay you. Or the other way the capitalist can make money is by exploiting you, by paying you less but decreasing the working day. So Marx argued not only was mercantilism exploitative, but liberal capitalism, as Adam Smith found it, was also exploitative. So what is the solution? Well, Marx's solution was communism. Now he builds on a Greek philosopher by the name of Epicurus, who developed this communal way of living. So what does that mean? He says, no, instead of there being a bourgeoisie or a capitalist who owns, let's say, the factory that produces the wine, the sugar, etc., no, the factory, the wine should be owned communally. All the workers should have ownership in these factories, and then they can pay themselves what they're worth. So to each he pays whatever his work is worth. So that was juxtaposed. So now you have three systems. You have mercantilism, which says there should be metropolitan areas, colonies, slaves, etc. You have liberal capitalism that says no, let a bourgeoisie own and freely trade. And then you have communism that Marx would introduce, in which he argues that no, the individual should own the factories and the agricultural communities, etc., and then pay themselves what they're worth and freely trade among each other. Socialism doesn't emerge until the 20th century, in which, because of this antagonism between liberalism and communism, many people argue that there should be a balance between the two. What does that mean? Well, you should not only have a bourgeoisie who owns the wealth in the factories, but you should also have a state that can intervene and provide the social welfare that prevents the workers from becoming poor, like you find in mercantilism and liberalism. So socialism was supposed to be a sort of medium between the communist who says the workers should own everything and off with the heads of the capitalists and the bourgeoisie, and then so there's a synthesis between liberalism and communism where you keep the bourgeoisie and the workers, and the state serves as a medium to provide social welfare. This is what you get in America coming out of the 1940s under the FDR administration. You get social welfare, you get social security. The only thing that the American state did not provide was health care, even though there was a project to provide universal health care to the workers, but that was cut short by the medical associations. But so socialism became a synthesis or between liberalism and communism, and Marxism is a critique of liberalism. Usually people assume that Marxism is its own economic model. No, Marxism is a critique of liberal capitalism. So that's why I tell people I'm a Marxist but a libertarian communist. I'm a libertarian communist because I'm Haitian, and in Haiti, when the Africans, because 70% of the Africans were directly from Africa when the Haitian Revolution commenced, the Africans actually tried to introduce an alternative economic system to the liberal and mercantilist project. We call that in Haiti La Coup. La Coup was an alternative system. It's called the La Coup system. So if you read my book, The Voodoo Ethic and the Spirit of Communism, I outlined what the La Coup system was that the Africans were trying to introduce in Haiti. So, but in contemporary times, we have basically, some people want to argue that we have three economic models that dominate the globe contemporarily: liberalism, socialism, and North Korea and Cuba maintain communism. But there's some scholars, economists, who want to argue that there is actually a return to mercantilism in contemporary times. People like Michael Hudson, they make that argument. So now not only do we have a return back to mercantilism, and what they call finance mercantilism, because America is a finance capitalist society.
Okay, so let's fast forward here to 2022, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
If you're migrating to a modern city, let's say London, or if you're migrating to Miami, or if you're migrating to Dubai, as an immigrant from a communistic society, or from a vis-a-vis social capitalistic mindset, how do you evolve yourself to be able to play in the present marketplace?
Great question. If you're an immigrant, there's not too many quote unquote communist societies contemporarily, because with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, what America tried to introduce in countries throughout the world is what we call neoliberal identity politics.
Yes.
So what that meant was there was a push away from countries. Remember, I said socialism was a synthesis between liberalism and communism, in which under socialism, the state provided your basic social welfare programs, Medicare, medical programs, free schooling, universal health care. Well, with the fall of the Soviet Union, America returned back to a liberal model in which what they tried to introduce is a move away from social welfare programs and a push for the privatization of everything, the privatization of schools, the privatization of healthcare, a weak state, and the logic being, if you privatize everything, you create more wealth in the society, and that wealth can trickle down, what we call Reaganomics, trickle down to the masses, and then the masses can in turn provide their own social welfare. They can provide their own health care, they can pay for private schools if they choose to. So now, when you push that model onto poor countries who already have a weak state, let's take Haiti, for example. Haiti is a paragon of the liberal model. They're trying to push this neoliberal. So they weaken the state and everything is privatized. Well, poverty, what we've seen is that poverty has increased under neoliberalism. Instead of,
If you may hold that thought for me,
go
just
ahead.
a quick caveat. Do you think that so happens so that the developed world can continue to exploit the undeveloped world?
Yes. The purpose is because America, post World War II, the American dollar became the international currency. Under the Bretton Woods Accord, America, the dollar became how everybody traded for their goods and service on an international scene. So they put institutions in place to not only continue the hegemony of the American dollar, but also now, in order for a country to participate in the international community, they had to adopt American neoliberal policies, because that's the only way you can get loans from the International Monetary Fund,
Yes.
the World Bank, etc. This is why what Russia is attempting to do and China is attempting to do contemporarily is problematic for America, because they're trying to come up with an alternative to the American dollar. So anyway, so now that you have this neoliberal project in place, what you find is that American companies are able to invest into these underdeveloped countries, and basically they become the bourgeoisie. They introduce McDonald's. Basically, it's a simulacra of American society. So you have foreign capital coming out of America and Europe working with local capital to basically maintain the people in the urban centers poor, basically to exploit them for labor. They cheapen the labor costs. This is why if you're an immigrant, 9 times out of 10, the reason why you're leaving your country is because you cannot find work. You're unable, because many of the societies coming out of the mercantilist era are periphery agricultural societies. So your family, they were farmers. And now you have American agribusinesses partnering with local companies to take over the land in many of these agricultural societies, and that forces people to leave the land to go look for work either in the cities, and if they can't find industrial work in their cities, now they have to immigrate to the metropole. And when they immigrate to America, what kind of work do they come and do? Service work, either working in a factory, working at McDonald's. You have to have 2 or 3 jobs just in order to survive. And the myth,
A lot of immigrants would disagree with you on that particular point. right?
Mhm.
Because we have a lot of skilled labor that will immigrate to America because
Yes.
America as a nation depends on their talent to be able to continue to push the progressive idea.
Good
However,
point.
I do understand where you're coming from.
No, you raise a good point because
Go ahead.
you have two forms of immigration that dominates the EU and American society. You
Go ahead.
don't hear about one, but you hear about the other. You'll hear in America about migrants on the front at the border trying to get into American society. These are poor agricultural migrants, and we pass policies against those migrants. But you don't hear about the immigration from China, Australia, and other places in Europe, for example, and Nigeria, where these immigrants are, as you point out, are coming with skills because they're college educated, and America needs those skills, those high institutional skills, as opposed to low migrant workers who are coming across the border. So there's two forms of immigration. Now the problem becomes which one dominates the contemporary international system. Is
Right.
it the high skilled labor immigration, or is it the low skilled, low wage immigration that's being pushed by neoliberal policies? I tend to argue that what dominates the contemporary system is that low skilled push labor force that's leaving their countries because they're unable to find work in their own country. Because think about it, how many immigrants really want to leave their countries? My father is in Haiti now, and if it was up to him, he would stay in Haiti because we have land. My father is highly educated, and so there's no need for him to leave his country. But many of us have to. When my parents initially came to this country, they came as low wage workers. You see what I'm saying? So, but yeah, there's two forms of immigration
Why
that
did they
dominate.
come to America?
My father actually immigrated to Paris in the 70s. He was studying to become a pilot. And in the late 70s, he immigrated to America. I was born in Haiti. And then they actually sent for me when I was about 6, 7 years old. But my father went on to become a radiologist in this country. And my mom didn't work. He was upper middle class. By the time,
I'm sorry, I have to jump in because now we're going to the really important nitty gritty of why
yes,
we do this show. So your father has this ginormous dream to become a pilot, and he goes to France to make that possible. Obviously, that did not happen, and he comes down to America and he switches into radiology.
yes.
And was it a compromise on giving up on his dream, something that most immigrants go through? Or was he being a responsible capitalist and taking advantage of what was provided him to help his family thrive?
It was a combination of both. My father, he left Paris because he found it was more. He realized it was more suitable to get his family, because he was newly married at the time. It was more suitable to get his family into America than it was to Paris, and there were more opportunities in terms of schooling in America than it was in Paris. So schooling and education was big, and as you know, for the immigrant community, the path to the American dream is schooling for many of them. There are some who come here and they're able to open up businesses and make it big, but the majority, I would say, of immigrants in America, the path to success has been schooling. And my
Let's
father used that path as a means to success. He would go on to be he would do real estate on the side, and he made millions from that. So yes, he was an entrepreneur, and that's who you find making this arduous journey to come to America and start anew. Is those who are entrepreneurially minded, who are willing to put in the hard work and use education as a stepping stone and business savvy to be successful in American society.
Dr. Macomb, if we may just, if somebody was looking for you on social media or online, how and where would they find you?
Oh, all they have to do is Google me. Because I've written so many books, but I'm not. I get blocked on social media because I support Russia. I support China. I think Israel is an apartheid state. So, when you're in American society and you hold these views, they mute you. So, most of my social media stuff, but we do have a reading room curriculum on YouTube. But usually, I do lectures around the world. So just Google me and my
Dr.
name
Macomb,
comes
you cannot touch on a hot topic and hope to escape it. Not on this show.
up.
We're going to delve into the things you probably were hoping I was not going to ask you because you brought up Israel. I'm going to ask you a question from the back end, right? If you were a citizen of the democratic state of Israel, born with a history of an Israeli, subjected to the hate you've seen over time, how do you, one, protect self, two, exist in this current world, and three, allow your neighbors to thrive?
Number one, Israel is not a democratic society. It's just like the American society is not a democratic society. America was established as a republic. Israel was established as a Zionist state, and their aim has been, in 1948, of course, by the British, and their aim have been to push the Palestinians out of their country. So since 1948, if you looked at a map, currently the Palestinians only occupy the Gaza Strip as well as the West Bank, and Israel has overtaken what used to be Palestine. And ever since it was established, Israel had, as a Zionist state, Israel has become an apartheid terrorist state, no different from.
Dr. Macomb, you're deviating from the question. Please, let's
No,
not
no, no,
avoid
no.
the question.
I'm getting to your point. I'm getting to your point.
Okay.
Just give me some. Because I don't know how savvy
Because you
your
started in
listeners.
1948. Yet I believe Israeli history goes way beyond 1948. So when you start in
Well,
19,
in that region, no, it doesn't, because in 70 A.D. the Romans got rid of Israel, so Israel didn't exist. By 1948, there was no state of Israel in that area. That does not mean there weren't Jews in the area, but there were. But anyway, since 1948, Israel has sought to take over the entire state, and it's done so terroristically. It's a settler colonial state, a right-wing Zionist state, and that has been bombing and killing Palestinian men, women, and children since 1948. Now, I don't believe in a two-state solution, even though the UN has requested that a two-state solution be implemented so that there is a Palestinian state as well as an Israeli state in that area. Israel has spoken against the two-state solution in this final push to eliminate Hamas, which Israel supports. Is the intent to get rid of the Palestinians and establish a one state in the area. So for that, I am against the apartheid settler colonial entity ruled by Zionists, and it's no different from what the South Africans attempted to do. And remember, Israel is a rogue state just like the United States. On November 2nd, 186 countries voted to lift the embargo against Cuba. Only 2 states voted to maintain that sanction: America and Israel. You're dealing with 2 rogue states that need to be sanctioned by the international community. It is because of the United States. America is the biggest sponsor of terrorism around the world. Look what they did to Libya. Look,
Dr.
yes,
Macomb,
go ahead, brother.
as an immigrant and as an immigrant show, I have to agree with you to a certain point.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I have to disagree with you almost totally.
On
Because
what point?
one, on the rogueness of Israel or the rogueness of America. We're talking about the place of immigrants around the world.
So let me ask you something, brother.
Go ahead.
Because we're immigrants, does that mean as an immigrant your moral compass is thrown out the window?
No, it's not.
Okay, because what America did to Libya, you think that was morally justifiable?
Dr. Macomb, I'm gonna say on the face of things is not. There's more to it, and that will be a show for a different day.
What America and the French are doing to West Africa,
Definitely wrong.
what America has done to Haiti, you think that's morally justifiable? With the Clinton.
There's a lot of wrong going on in the world today.
So therefore, as an immigrant, because you're an immigrant in the country that is promoting violence around the world, does that mean I have to keep my mouth shut as an immigrant?
Absolutely not. You are entitled to your opinion, and you are entitled.
No. See, I don't believe, because I'm a social scientist, so I do believe that there are facts and there are opinions.
Okay.
So me calling America the biggest sponsor of terrorism around the world, that's a fact. Every country has bear witness to American violence around the world. America is the only nation that has used atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. So
Yes.
We have to make sure that we distinguish between opinion and fact. What America has been doing since 1991 is destabilize countries around the world. In the Middle East, in Africa. The Arab Spring was sponsored by the Americans from 2007. What America is doing in Ukraine, that is American foreign policy destabilizing a region to go to war with China. They have a proxy war with Russia. They fomented a coup in Ukraine to support Nazis against Russia. And yet, when you read the news or when you watch the news, you would think, oh, America is fighting for democracy in Ukraine. While simultaneously in 2000, America recognized Ukraine as the most corrupt nation in Europe. It's filled with Nazis, and yet now they want my taxpayer dollars to go and support a Nazi fascist regime like Ukraine because they want to have a proxy war with Russia. You don't think that's immoral? Immigrant or not, you don't think that's immoral?
Dr. Macomb.
It's a yes or no question, brother.
There are certain things I was going to agree with you, and there were certain things I was going to disagree with you.
Okay.
And now there's a third perspective to it. There are certain things I'm not going to have a comment on, and I'll tell you why.
I got you. That's fair. That's fair.
It's because my goal is to not politically analyze a successful or failed government. Mine is to analyze how immigrants can best tap into a successful and a failed government so that they can succeed.
But you don't think that's problematic in terms of your
I think
logic?
It's problematic. And this is why we're having this conversation. So that as an immigrant, how do we identify what nations to affiliate with? How do we identify what nations do we migrate to so that our values as immigrants can align to the values of the nations we migrate to?
I'm with you. Good point. Good point. I'm going to use, I don't like anecdotal evidence, but I'm going to use my case as an anecdote real quick. My wife is Black American, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm Haitian. I was born in Haiti and I'm 48 years old. And I've been teaching for over 20 years at middle school level all the way up to university. And right now, my wife and I are having a disagreement because my values and morals do not align with the American nation state, and as we get closer to retirement, even before retirement, we're looking to immigrate. My wife does not want to because, of course, she's Black American. Her family is here. Her father runs a church. I'm an atheist, and I'm not a so she we've been married almost 20 years, and the issue is, where do we go? Because we're looking to leave. Well, I'm looking to leave the United States because I do not adopt or accept its values and what it's doing. I don't accept identity politics. I don't accept its foreign policy. So we've been having this disagreement for the past I'll say 10 years. So we've narrowed it down as either we move to Russia or we move to Belize, because a lot of my values are more in line with the Russian nation state. I've been to Russia. But I don't want to stay in the West. I think the West is on a decline. I think many immigrants are coming to this country, and many come from traditional societies, and when they come to America, I believe I wrote a book maybe 10 years ago called The My Nigga Haitian, and what I describe is what was happening to young Haitians who were immigrating to America. And what was happening is they were falling into the class structure of the American society and adopting the identity politics, and then trying to export it back to Haiti. And Haiti is a traditional society. And so for me, I find that very problematic, trying to extrapolate and immigrate what I consider perverse forms of life onto the island of Haiti. So,
Dr. Macomb, let's explore it in a couple of things you spoke about.
Mhm.
One, you've touched on colorism. Two, you've touched on color, and I have my own opinion on color. Well, for one, I on a personal basis, I have a problem when African Americans refer to themselves as Black. I just
Yes.
don't believe that is an identity.
I agree.
And especially if I have an option to refer to myself as an African American, which is the right way to refer to yourself. But that aside, from a social perspective, because in your career you speak a lot about sociological perspectives. From a sociological standpoint, what are some of the systemic barriers you believe individuals face on the path of success, not just in America, but across the world, when they migrate, and how might they overcome them?
One of the biggest issues, especially when you migrate to the West, that you deal with is, especially if you're coming from a traditional society, number one, is the urban lifestyle you find in these societies. Number two, the rules-based culture that you find in these societies. We have this mantra in sociology that if American society truly enforced their laws, we each commit a criminal act regularly. So when you come from traditional societies, you're not used to the regimentation of life in the West. Life in America and in the West is very regiment. You wake up, you go to work, you come home, you go to sleep, you do the same thing over and over again. And then when you come from traditional society, that's one. There's an economist, William Julius Wilson, who African American economist, and he points that out. He highlights that there's a work ethic that some immigrants come with because they've had to do, but so it's the work ethic, it's the regimentation of society that you find here. It's also the identity politics that you may not have to deal with back home when you're coming from traditional societies to America, where you're having to deal with LGBTQ plus whatever. You know, that's not something we deal with when you come from the islands, if you come from Africa, etc. So it's the culture shock as well. And when I taught at Bethune-Cookman, many of my students were first generation Haitian Americans or Nigerian Americans. So that's one of the issues that they had to deal with. And how I tell them to deal with it versus how they deal with it is a totally different thing. One of the issues, I digress. Before we deal with that, another issue is, especially when you're dealing with African people who come from either Africa, the Caribbean, when they come here, there is a sort of intra-racial conflict between these African people from the Caribbean and Africa and the African American. I don't know if you did you go to school here in America, but as a Haitian, we had to deal with a lot of, in fact, I would say I dealt with more racism from the Black American community than I did from the white American community.
You love trouble, so but keep going.
But many of my
You have to
non-African
marry one
American,
of them.
yes, they have to deal with that. Believe it or not, they don't see the white racism, whereas they'll see more so the Black intra-racism. That's the biggest issue I believe that many young immigrants have to deal with, because many Black Americans, I don't know, is it because one of the issues that my Black American students highlight is the fact that they believe that when Black students from the Caribbean and America come here to America, they feel like they're better than their parents would tell them they're better than the Black American because of the stereotypes that we get of Black America in the islands and in Africa. So that's one. I think that's the biggest issue my students have to deal with. Now, older immigrants, when they come to America, they have to deal with the regimentation of American society, the identity politics in American society, and also there's a great book out. I forget the author's name. The book is titled Listavec, and it describes the immigrant experience of Haitians who came here during the 70s and 80s, how they had to deal with not only the intra-Black racism, but they also had to deal with the white racism. Because many of them came from predominantly Black societies, they really didn't have to deal with the white racism so much as the Black American. And to form any sort of solidarity with Black America is very difficult. In fact, there is a movement in Black America now. It's called the American Descendant of Slave Movement. It's called the ADOS movement, in which they're actually protesting to prevent non-African American Blacks from taking on Black roles in Hollywood, from identifying as African American, from even being eligible for reparations should reparations pass. So these are some of the biggest issues I think immigrants have to deal with when they come here, and it takes a lot of fortitude to deal with those issues.
As an immigrant, do you overcome race and racism or tribalism in some sectors, which we also have experienced from where we come from? Usually it will be tribalism from a culture that speaks multiple languages, or it's going to be race based on the color of your skin. But how, when you migrate to America, do you bring yourself out of that torture and face a new system where you have to learn how to adapt, not just in America, but also when you go to other places in the Western world? And with that, when you migrate from the Western world to the developing nations, how do you adapt?
You mean when a Westerner is going to a developing country?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually easier for Westerners. Like, for example, many Westerners at post the earthquake in Haiti, many of them went to live in Haiti. It's easier for them because they bring so much capital into these countries. It's a lot easier for them to accommodate themselves versus when an immigrant from a developing country is migrating to places like Europe. And what studies have shown, many immigrants, when they arrive in places like Europe, America, they don't conceive of race the way the Black American does. In fact, many of them don't even think about it. They attribute their failures or their success based on their own initiative. Whereas when studies that look at how Black Americans, African Americans view their failures or success, there's always a third party. They attribute it to racism. That does not hold true for immigrants who come here. Their success or failure is usually attributed to either their own initiative or lack of initiative, versus Black Americans who, oh, I didn't get this job because the hiring process is racist. Immigrants don't think on those levels. The initiative is based on their lack of success, or success is based on their own initiative, versus the African American who will attribute it to race or racism or prejudice. That the immigrant doesn't do so. And that is, although it's a subtle difference, but that's very important, because if you view your lack of success as an immigrant on your own initiative, you only have two options. Either you work harder, or you just accept the failure and not do at all.
That's
Versus
right.
if you view your lack of success based on the racism of society, right there you already lost, because now you said there's no need for me to try, because I will always encounter racism so this is why you find so many successful Black non-immigrant successful Black immigrants versus non-successful African Americans, because many, like for my father, when he came here, if he applied for a job right after medical school and he didn't get it, he didn't say, oh, it's racism. No. He said, you know what? Maybe I wasn't qualified and I had to get more experience or go back to school, get a degree. Now, if my father looked at it, oh, it's racism, that would have been it. There was no need to continue. But instead, he viewed it as, no, I need to do more, or I had to be better. In fact, that's what was taught in my home. My father would say to us, you have to be better than the people you're competing against. So I always strive, even in school, even now as a professional, I strive. My aim is to hopefully win a Nobel Prize in physics and literature. That's what I'm aiming for. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, because I don't see racism the way, let's say, my African American wife may look at it. Even though I understand there's something called institutional racism, as a sociologist, I know, yes, American society was based on racial laws that prevented the African American from being successful. But because I didn't have that experience, I don't attribute my failures or lack of success to the racism. For me, it's my initiative. So one takes away agency, the other does not.
Speaking about education and success, how much influence did your dad contribute to who you've become today? And what role has academia played in your success? And what advice would you have for young immigrants who are migrating across the globe?
Education, 1,000%. My dad, 1,000%. My dad was my first role model. I thought he was the most brilliant man in the world. You know, my dad spoke four different languages. You know, so I looked up to my father. He emphasized education in the home. And unlike many immigrants, because of the success of my father, I was able to go to some of the top private schools in America. And education has played a significant role. In fact, I push education on my students. I know there's a mantra now, not everybody can succeed educationally, but my father pushed education, I push education. In fact, raising my sons, there was no alternative. My eldest son was a brilliant soccer player, but he knew the option of going pro did not supersede earning a degree in the field. So both my children, I push education heavily, because although there are ways in American society, not in Europe so much, but in American society, someone can come over, open up a business, and make millions. But that's still, there is a social capital, economic capital, and class factor that education provides for immigrants, that no matter how much money you have, you can never look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump is, made millions, but yet he always points to the fact, oh, I'm a graduate of University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school. Many of those who are in leadership position graduated from Ivy League school. So why is it good for leaders, but it's not good for immigrants? Something that is a contradiction. So for me, education is key, because with education, it prevents I believe education can prevent a lot of the apathy that we see among young immigrant
Definitely.
youth. Yeah, absolutely, brother.
Can you share a significant challenge you faced in your career and what lessons you learned from it about succeeding against the odds, and whether those lessons have also translated into a successful marriage?
Oh, ooh. I've been fortunate. I've had tremendous success in life. But, because I come from a traditional home in society, in the Haitian culture, one of the biggest obstacle I had to deal with, I wanted to, I've had the opportunities to teach at Ivy League institutions, but I turned them down because I wanted to teach at traditionally Black colleges, because I believe young Black men and women needed role models so that they can achieve academically. And so,
Was that decision impacted by your earlier experiences in America?
yes and no. It was impacted by the fact that, yes, in all of my schooling from elementary to high school, I've only had one Black teacher. So from the time I came to this country at 6 years old to the time I was 18, I only had one Black or African American teacher. So it didn't impact me so much because I had my father, and my father was brilliant enough, so I looked up to my father. But as I started to teach middle school, I realized the impact it had on especially young Black males. Because they don't see themselves in the and that's the origins of my theory, oppositional culture theory. Because young Black males don't see themselves in positions that require academic success, many of them don't pursue these fields. So, for example, I will walk into a conference where I'm the only so-called Black philosopher there. Or I'll walk into a physics conference and there's not one Black male face in the room. So, and that's been an obstacle for me, because I've always put supporting people who look like me. And sometimes that's not always the best decision, because people who look like you, although you may think you have their best interests at heart, they don't have your best interests at heart. So those are some of the personal obstacles I've had. I've never had to deal with any professional obstacles, but in terms of my worldview, I've dealt with some obstacles.
We're always told in success you need to find a mentor, somebody who's thrived in the area that you want to thrive in, and learn from them so that you can thrive. Growing up and even today, are there individuals, people who you look up to, and what are the key factors you're looking from them so that you can continue to grow yourself as an individual, as an immigrant, and continue to have a positive impact in the world?
Growing up, because the Haitian community was so segregated from the larger community, my role models were my grandfather, my father. I had an uncle who was a physicist, my uncle Gary. He played a significant role. The black men in my family played a significant role in my success. My grandfather, my father, my uncle Gary. I had an uncle by marriage who I would go around and ask him questions about the universe, and he never tired of me. He would always answer my questions. His name is Va. He played a significant role, and that taught me the patience to deal with my students, to be a role model for them. So growing up, my mentors were the black men in my family. They were strong family men, and even now there's a degree of honor and respect that I hold for them, that whenever I'm doing anything in the world, I have to keep in mind I shouldn't do this because my Uncle Gary would not want me to do this. So mentoring is huge. And then I have two more mentors in grad school. I had a professor, his name he passed away, Dr. Stanford M. Lyman, a brilliant man. And he took me under his arms and made me read everything in his library. And then I had another professor, Teresa Brennan. She took me under her arm. And in fact, she was the first one to get me to look at things from a moral perspective. So mentoring is huge. Having role models, and then two more role models that my father introduced me to: Bertrand Russell, who was a brilliant English philosopher, and Frantz Fanon, the Martinican psychologist. I've read everything by both of these guys, and I try to pattern my professional writing careers around those two men. So having successful role models in your life is key for me to being a successful immigrant. That's very important, brother. And when we
Thank you so
started,
much.
I know Philip said he told me you were a mentor for him. So basically you're doing what, the men in my family did for me, So kudos to you, brother. Kudos to you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I really do. One question, very quickly. If you had an opportunity to speak to immigrants of color, specifically in America, how would you encourage them to overcome the trials and tribulations, difficulties you go through as a person of color migrating to the US to be able to become successful and contribute to community?
Many immigrants in this country, especially immigrants of color, they deal with their trials and tribulation through the church, and I understand that. I unfortunately I didn't have the church so much as an institution that allowed me to deal with the frustrations of life. Nietzsche says it is the church it's morality that protects life against despair and the leap into nothingness. So I understand many immigrants, they tend to be very religious, and the church and when I say the church, I mean the values in God serves as a mechanism to deal with the trials and tribulation as an immigrant in some hostile society. I didn't deal with that. I had my family, my father, my cousins. So I had a social milieu that allowed me to deal with the trials and tribulations of the society. So what I would recommend for immigrants, if you don't have, try to form communities to assist you to deal with the trials and tribulations you're going through outside of God. But so that for me was the big thing. My social network served as a means of dealing with the trials and tribulations. So if you're an atheist immigrating, try to form or get yourself into a social network that can assist you in dealing with the regimentation, the culture issues, the intraracial issues, and some other factors that you may have to deal with in these societies.
If you're an immigrant in America, you're also an immigrant in, say, for example, Israel, or you're an immigrant in Palestine. Do you think immigrants in those war-torn countries have a role to play, or it would be best for them to pack and leave?
Whew, man, that's a tough question. I don't know. I don't know too many. There are some African immigrants. In grad school, I went to Israel to serve on a panel to deal with the Palestinian-Israeli issue, and I did encounter some African brothers and sisters who were living in Israel, and life for them was tough. Because they had to deal. Many people don't believe, but they had to deal with the racial issue in Israel, and they had to deal with the conflict as well. So many of them, they're there. I met a lot of Falashian Jews who were African Jews from Ethiopia who immigrated to Israel. But that's doubly tough. You're not only having to deal with the racial issue, but you're also having to deal with the conflict, the constant crisis, and I would recommend them that they leave. To be honest with you, brother, I wouldn't recommend anyone come to America, Western Europe, or Israel. I'm gonna be frank with you.
Dr. Macomb, you live in America, so why wouldn't you encourage anybody?
I'm looking to leave in this day and age, brother. I'm trying to even tell my sons to leave this country, brother. It's horrendous. We're living in Babylon. If I may borrow from Bob Marley, this is Babylon, brother.
Right.
And you have if you don't have your head on your shoulder, you can get lost in this society, brother. It's difficult. I'm gonna give you an anecdote real quick.
Yes.
I was about 24, 25, and I had to give a lecture at a place called Gothenburg, Sweden. And on the plane, I sat next to a German guy. And I cut off my dreads, but my dreads were longer than Philip's. And on the plane, the German guy asked me, why am I going to Sweden? No, he said to me, you're going to Sweden to perform in a concert, right? And I got insulted. I said, no, I'm actually a philosopher and I'm going. He was like, oh, I'm so sorry. He apologized. I said, I'm going to give a lecture. And when I got to Sweden, I hung out with some African brothers from Sudan, from all over Africa. And one of the issues that they were dealing with, and we were now dealing with it, many of the young immigrants, especially from Africa, are dealing with them here, is the fact that they could not date their own women from Africa because the young sisters who were living in Sweden, they were trying to marry or date white men, Swedish men who had money. And because they were poor immigrant students, the sisters didn't want them. So that caused social strife in the African immigrant community in Sweden. And so on top of that, they had to deal with social issues. They had to deal with their own internal dating issues. So I just found that so interesting.
Dr. Macomb, I can't help but I feel like there's a pretense to some extent. You're an immigrant in America. You would stand there and say, I discourage anybody from migrating to America. You're also looking to migrate to another country. Are you running from the truth of who you are and what you've structured around you? Or are you actually confronting your truth and trying to discover ways to live a free, productive immigrant's life?
In a nutshell, I would love to go back to Haiti. My father has land there. My father
So why
is
not
there.
go back?
The problem being that they've so destabilized the country. I don't know if you're familiar, but they just killed our president last year. They've so destabilized the country. the country is still dependent on American foreign aid just to survive. So I say that to say I'm running to a material resource framework where I can exercise my moral values as a free person of color.
Got it.
And America is not as a free black heterosexual black man. I'm looking to go where I can exercise my freedom, and America is not the place, brother. That's why I said I would not. If you share my values, let's do that as a caveat. If you share my traditional values, I would not recommend America or Western Europe. I would recommend a place like Russia, which I've been to. I would recommend to a place, even Cuba, which I've been to. So I would recommend, if you as an immigrant have to assess what is important to you in life, and based on that, you decide where you want to exercise your agency, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Macomb, how is technology today, social media, affecting the place of the immigrant, and how will AI affect that in the near future?
Oh, great question. I don't know if you're familiar. Creole was listed as the #1 language spoken on social media. What was it, last year? And that has the brilliance of contemporary modern technology is that now you have access. I can speak to my father regularly on WhatsApp. When I was younger and my grandparents were in Haiti, how they would communicate with us, my grandparents would send tapes to America where they would record themselves speaking, and then my father would get it and whatever. But now, all you have to do is send a cell phone to Haiti or wherever, and they have access to the internet. They're on social media. Wherever you are, you're on social media. So it helps to expand your social network, believe it or not. I have family members who are in Haiti who are part of my social network community. So in that sense, social media can actually help to deal with some of the issues we pointed to earlier, the regimentation of society, some of the culture issues. So social networking helps with that. AI really, for me, is no different from... people are making a big deal with AI because of the potential to be destructive. But as of now, AI hasn't really transmogrified the contemporary technological space yet. And I don't see what value it will serve long term, because we're just getting the society is just getting technically more savvy. Now it has the potential to displace immigrants. It has the potential, because as American society becomes more finance, more technical, there's less of a need for low-skilled immigrants, and that I see some strife there. But in the same breath, it has the potential to attract, more skilled labor force, immigrants from China, from Indonesia, from Western Europe, and Nigeria and elsewhere. So it balances out.
Dr. Macomb, it's been a pleasure. Where again can people find you on social media?
Just Google my name, brother. They'll find me.
All right, wonderful. Dr. Macomb, it's been such a great pleasure. I enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for making time for us and for making time for the immigrants. We wish you the very best.
Thank you, brother.
All right, thank you.